Hello, this is my third video, third of three. It's been a busy week here at Coder Academy. We just finished off our terminal assignments where the entire cohort has made a terminal assignment or a terminal application in pure Ruby. And that spans from like games to applications to web scrapers to like all sorts of really cool stuff, and got to see all of those today. I was super impressed by what my peers have done. But yeah, I thought I would take a chance to make a video. I think what I really want to talk about in this video is testing and probably documentation and just show off what I've made. So I'm just going to run this in the background and shortcut it so it starts running. I made a simple game. It's kind of like a, I don't know, like a reaction time game. It flashes stuff at you, and then you need to type in the word fast enough. If you do it too slow, then you lose points, blah, blah, blah. And you keep playing, so you either win or you hit game over. So yeah, it was fun to make. I'd already sort of made something similar, and then going through the process of doing it properly was really interesting for me. And I think one thing that was super interesting about this game, or making this, was the idea of documentation. I think here at Coder, this was the first time we'd really run into documentation and the idea of doing documentation first, doing all your tests, and then writing your program. And because I had already sort of semi-coded this before, I knew I could make a game that fits the description. I thought, well, I'll just write it again, but this time I'll do my documentation, stellar, and try and lean into that, because it is still really scary to me, doing documentation and writing your tests first for an application you don't actually know exactly how it's going to function. So I think with this I'll just like talk about the application itself, and then I'll move on to like the testing thing, and talk about what I did and what I was thinking about when I did it. Let's just keep this rolling. So it's a game. I mean, there's sort of like two main classes and three modules here. There's a terminal class, which kind of takes care of all the very front end stuff. This game takes command line arguments. It helps filters those. It has a help page in it. It sort of keeps the main game loop running. So, I mean, we can have a quick look at it. I mean, not that this all just looks like gobbledygook to anyone who hasn't been doing this as much as I have, but yeah, so it just like is reading command line arguments. It's rescuing errors in the game if they happen, so they're nicely formatted, and then it's also validating command line. Super simple, really easy, and this is also a loop kind of thing. And then the actual, like where the kind of meat of it is in the game class, and that's importing all of the modules, all of the gems that I was using, and it's just based on loops, phrases, and prompts, and then kind of rolling through those, waiting for input. And yeah, like I use the timeout gem in this as well, which is interesting. Like I found some really finicky stuff with that. Like I think it seems like from what I've read, using this gem is like kind of risky. I certainly had some weird stuff going on when I was using it. Anyway, so I don't know, like oh yeah, and the modules themselves, just to talk about those real quick. So we've got the game and the terminal, and that's sort of like, these classes are responsible for running well, obviously they're obviously for running instances, but like they're the things that are doing the heavy lifting, and everything else is just kind of bolt on. So the modules are bolt on for me, and I've got sort of an ASCII module that just contains all of big blocks of text, that kind of thing. So it's neater. I've got data. So here's all my difficulty hashes that changes difficulty. And then we've got all of our prompts that we randomly select from, depending on difficulty, and then all of our quotes that randomly generate with a faker gem. And then there's also a functions module. And basically I tried to divvy it up so all of the functions that are in the game class should be only responsible for they only go on the games class if they need to like manipulate and change class variables, like instance variables, sorry. And then with these ones here in the functions module, this is more just like general stuff. It also has like a colors array in it, which is sort of acting as a constant that is modifiable. You can also run this game in black and white, so it needed to be modifiable. Anyway, so the idea of the functions module is that it contains everything that's not like, you know, I could reuse like all these typing methods. The checker is kind of cool. Like I'm sure I could use that somewhere else if I wanted to. They're very like basic, relatively basic methods that are recyclable, hopefully. We'll find out. Anyway, so when I was doing this, like in the lead up, let's go again. We're really strongly encouraged to like write all of our documentation first and write all our tests. And I was like, well, I've technically coded the game once before. It's like much messier than this version here, especially in the code base. So I was like, well, I know more or less how it works, theoretically. So why don't I just lean into this and do the full thing? Like I should be able to just sit down and nut out exactly how the program's going to work. So that's what I did. I basically wrote all of my documentation first, and then I wrote all of my tests, including manual. So I mixed between unit testing and manual testing. With this game stuff, I'm not quite sure how to test things like user input, like in a real good way, other than just being like, does it work? Like if it says press enter or Q and I press enter and then I press Q, what happens? And then what happens if I mash the keyboard? Like it seems easier in some ways to just do that instead of trying to figure out how to like simulate a keyboard press. However, what I did use all my unit tests for was all of the background work that's happening. So in this game, what's happening right now, well, it's 0, but like the way that it's selecting prompts, the way that it's calculating the scores, the way that it's validating whether my answer that I'm inputting is correct or not. These are all like sort of back end, put data in, get data out methods. And that is exactly what I'm using for unit. Like those are the methods that I can test in unit testing. So if we go over to our tests file here. Cool. So this is like using the test unit gem that you can get off rubygems.org. I really like it. I haven't used RSpec before. I've had a look at RSpec. It confuses me as much as this one, I suppose. I guess I've just put more time into this, so this is what I'm using. I think the hard thing about testing to me, it seems, as like a complete 5-week, having done coding for 5 weeks and kind of introducing myself to this concept, is like when you write your methods, generally speaking, in order for unit testing for me to feel good, you're putting something in and you're getting something out, and that thing that you put in can be different, and the thing that you get out will be different. And like that seems really abstract, but like when you think about, okay, how, if you do your development in the sense that you write your tests first, or you think about writing your tests first, you have to write a back-end method that is going to take data and it's going to give you data that's based on the data that you gave it. If that makes sense. That like changes how you write methods. If you're writing methods that take class instance variables and it's all in there, like if these methods here, if these methods had a class instance variable and they might have to like instantiate that thing, assign it, it doesn't, the method becomes more specified. It's using this like very specific piece of data that's inside of the method. However, when like the classic, like if you have a method that just adds 2 numbers, you're putting 2 numbers in and you're getting a number out, and that is as basic as it gets. And I think with the test-driven development, at least the way it feels to me, is test-driven development, it really encourages you to make your methods like that. It encourages you to slim down your methods, make your methods really simple. Like, what are we trying to achieve with our methods? And how can we test them? What is the basic point of this method? It like encourages you to get away from putting 5 methods in one method that's like manipulating data and doing all this cool stuff and say, okay, well, why don't we just like make 5 different methods that do 5 simple things, and then when you chain all of that together, it's doing the same thing anyway, except you can test it, and then you've got these 5 different things that you can then port over to a different code base, which is super cool. Like, I think I had the feeling when I first started doing this, like, I would like make these methods. I'm like, oh, I can do these cool methods that literally do everything for me, and all I have to type is like 1 word and it does everything, which is sweet, but also not super like portable. You can't, if I wanted to take that method and put it in a different code base, then it's just going to be like a complete nightmare to adapt it to whatever it's supposed to do now, which is slightly different. The more specialized the method, the harder to test, the less portable it is. So I think what I'm trying to say is that if you embrace the idea of TDD and make your methods test unit testable, you'll have like a much easier time debugging. You have a much easier time reusing code from old code bases. So like my experience here was I literally went through and wrote an implementation. I wrote like a test unit plan, and then that like literally listed all the methods that I thought I was going to create, and then also a manual testing plan. Again, did the same thing. And I think, oh no, that's what I did. Okay, I wrote an implementation plan where I basically went through in my head, okay, what needs to happen, and I sort of like laid out the structure of the methods that I wanted. From there, I then wrote my test unit tests, being like, okay, these methods should do this. They should take this data and they should spit this out, this data. And obviously there was like, that wasn't perfect. Like I didn't write these exactly the way they are now and then just write the methods to suit. There was a little bit of finagling because I'm still learning how to use the test unit gem as well, and like what's the best way to test. But it was surprising to me that the one massive thing, my huge takeaway from this was that it took me so long to write the documentation. It took me so long to write the tests and to write the methods to satisfy the test. But the moment I had done that, all I had to do was just sort of like shuffle the methods around in my code base, and I had the program. I had like the bare bones of the program, and the rest of it was sort of like sprinkles, if you will. Making it look real nice and making sure everything works really well, and like trying to break the thing and doing all that kind of stuff. So I think I did have this like strange moment of clarity where I was like, whoa, like this is already coming together, and I feel like I haven't sat down and like tried to build it up from the ground like I had, or like not in the same way as I had previously. I think, at least if my experience is anyone, like, well, talking from my experiences, learning how to code, you sort of like, oh, you have this idea and you start coding it. You're like, maybe this will work, maybe that'll work. Like you start writing bits of code and you like graveyard some things, and then you keep other stuff, and you sort of like create this like strange like little network of methods and classes and stuff. And eventually it works, usually. And usually, at least for me, it always feels like when I get to this stage, I'm like, well, it works, which is cool. But I'm also really scared to touch my code. And I think doing this testing first, documentation first, even if the documentation is like, what am I trying to achieve? And like, what are the methods that are going to get me there? Like, what's the data I'm putting in? What am I getting out? And then trying to prepare for that before getting into the like sexy code writing part. Oh man, I think it just makes our lives easier, even though it sucks. And maybe I'm going to like do a complete 180 on that in the next couple of months. I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting, Yeah. So I think like just to talk about this a bit, what's actually happening here. I think some humans in my course like haven't used the test unit thing much. Some of them have. And I think like basically to explain it real easy, if you're into that. If you're not into me explaining this to you, that's okay. You can tune out now. I'm done. Like, you've seen the game run. I just sort of wanted to talk through my thing. But if you are interested in how this works, stick around. So basically, the way it works, you need to require test unit. You need to make a class. So up here, it's required test unit. You need to make a class that inherits from test : unit test case. And then every time you make a unit test, it needs to start with test, and then you can put in whatever you want here. It's fine. As long as it makes sense to you and hopefully to other people. And then like it seems like the bread and butter of the test unit is assert equal. You put in a expected outcome, and then you put in the method that should give you that outcome. And then here is this third optional thing is what you can put if you don't want it, if you like want to put a custom message if it fails, basically, which can help if you've got like a billion tests, I suppose. So for this one, this is a command line argument method. If I instantiate the terminal, every time I instantiate the terminal, it gets passed whatever the command line argument is. And therefore, I wanted to make sure that, which I think defaults to nothing. Like if there's nothing entered, it will just give it an array that's empty, which I should have tested, and I haven't tested it here. So yeah, so I'm basically giving it different commands to command line, terminal command things, and I wanted to make sure that it was returning them. It wasn't like messing up, basically. Here I've got a little bit fancier. I've basically programmed in some raises. So I didn't want the thing to run if you gave it a trash command line argument, and I also didn't want it to run if you gave it too many command line arguments. You can kind of skip through the game and change some certain things, and I think in my mind, if you gave it, I didn't really think about this too hard, but the simple version was like, if you give it more than two arguments and it takes it, there's a chance that you can break something easier if you just give it two. Like the maximum you should ever need to give it is 2 for a difficulty setting, and changing it to no color. Literally everything else will be prioritized. You know, you can call the help menu, that just calls the help menu and it prioritizes that and stops the game. Or you can tell the game to crash, because I wanted to make sure that the game would actually rescue, like the terminal class would rescue the game if it crashed, which is why I programmed that in. So I mean, like, that felt weird when I like literally programmed in something to like, if I say no here and I run this init with crash, it will crash the game. It'll raise an error inside the game class, not inside the terminal class, whereas these ones are inside the terminal class. That's inside the game class. And that was just to check that it would actually give me this. It would stop the game and stop the program, and it would like end the loop in the terminal and give me this error message the way it's formatted. I don't know if there's probably a better way to do that, to test the rescue statement. Basically, you needed to, well, I don't know, you needed to create an argument. I mean, you needed to test that it would crash. So why not put in a little like raise thing in there? So yeah, inputs and outputs. That's what's happening. And same with these, like I had a prompt selector. So every time the game starts, depending on what difficulty is selected, it will select 5 random prompts from a prompt array inside of a hash. So with this method, you feed it a key to the hash, and then the method itself, all it does is shuffle the array and then select the first 5 prompts. So I couldn't figure out how to test that the actual prompts were random, in a sense that it wasn't returning the same 5 prompts. But I knew that I was going from 10 to 5, and that I could test really easily. Like this should always select 5, not 10. Therefore, prompt size should always equal 5, no matter what I call it. So I just tested all of them, like easy. And I know that, and now I know they all work. I didn't have to go through. I didn't have to wonder too hard whether if a bug came up, that's what was doing it, because I've already tested it. And if I was wondering, I can just run this entire file again. And if it tests fine, great. I guess the thing is here, you need to make sure you need to make sure you write your tests really well. What else have I got? So color changer, making sure it returns a single color array. Difficulty with colorize, that's why it looks funky, with the score display. So this is a display thing, a really easy display thing. I wanted to test that that it would always display it correctly. So it's a current score thing. You pass it the score, you pass it a difficulty hash, and then it will look at the hash for this, and then it will also display your current score. So that's like super easy testing for like small display things. Inputs and outputs. That's what it feels like it boils down to me. Like, you want to create your methods in a way that they are so malleable. Like, it feels like you're repeating yourself when you like look at the actual way these are being used. So if we look at what happens during the game, every round this is happening. So like each round, this selector is being fed phrases, display to user is getting fed this, deleter is getting fed this and this, and like I'm doing it again down here. And I think that like in a way it would look sleeker to like have this gone, have that gone. You know, I could just say have phrase selector and then prompt selector. But in doing that, you've made this like what could be this beautifully simple method that only, you know, it just selects stuff from whatever array you give it, to like one that will only look for a certain variable within the thing. You know, I'd have to like turn this into a class instance variable, and then it would be inside of this, and that just makes it harder to use elsewhere. So maybe it's more about like creating our methods so they are like, say like, could I use this method elsewhere when I'm writing it? You know, like what would it take for this method to be useful elsewhere? You know, if I wanted to take it over to a different project, and maybe that is a good place to start in terms of like A, writing methods, and B, writing methods in a way that makes them easy to test. Because it should take data and then it should give you an output, and then maybe if you change the data that's inputted, it should give you a different output. I don't know. So those are my thoughts. I don't know. So like, I had a lot of fun doing this. I think it was really interesting. I'm certainly probably not going to look at it again for like another week, which is fine, I think. I'm ready to like do something different. Yeah. Cool. That's all I got. Hopefully this was helpful to some people. And if not, I hope you enjoyed listening to me speak at you for, what are we up to, 22 minutes? Yeah. And I am looking forward to playing some of the games using some of the apps that I saw today. Sweet. Thanks for listening.